Okay, so now we're gonna look at number 13 from the practice test. So this is looking at histograms. And again, this is from chapter 2 in the statistics book we're using. So just some things about histograms real quick, and these are things we'll see in this problem. Histograms, we're looking at numerical data. So we look at things like the shape of it, symmetric, if is it skew left or right. We look at the modality, is it unimodal, which means it unimodal, which means is there like one peak? Bimodal, are there two? Multimodal would be anything larger than two, so 3, 4, etc. And then we also want to look at outliers, possibly to help us determine. Number 2, the second thing we tend to look at when we're talking about numerical data, the center. So you have your typical value, and there's also like the highest peak when we start talking about our sampling distributions. And then the last thing we want to look at is the spread of the variation in our data as it appears in the histogram. And that's what we're going to see here as well. So the histograms show the body mass index for 93 females and 85 males. Compare the distributions of BMIs for women and men. Be sure to compare the shapes, the centers, and the amount of variation for the two groups. Okay, so take a moment and look at that. And let's see, what do we think about our two histograms? So I'm actually going to come in over here and let's kind of look at it. So the first thing, what do we think about the symmetry of this? What do we think? So if we look at it, this has one peak, right? It's going to be at 20 right here. That's the peak of this. And if we were to draw our sampling distribution, it would look like that. Looking at the BMI for men, it would go up and down because there's actually two peaks, right? So right away we see that men's going to be bimodal. Like a bicycle has two wheels, bimodal has two peaks. You see that? Good. So women is unimodal. Good. Like a unicycle has one wheel. And then, so the peak for women would be 20, right? Okay, good. Now, if we want to talk about the center, that's about where half of my data is 50% greater than or less than. And I mean, the center tends to look about the same on these two. I'd say 24 is about the center for both. If I had to look at it, I'd say that's about the center, oops, for both of these. So that's where I see my peaks, right? Those are going to be the highest frequency items. I would say this is probably the center, if I had to guess, just from looking, kind of at where I think half of the values are greater than or less than, just because this one, I mean, they're both right skewed, but this one like has a little bit more out there. So, and again, I think the center here, that second peak is the center for the men. What else do you want to talk about? The spread. Okay, let's talk about the spread now. So I'll just get a different color for that. Okay. So for the spread, women obviously has much higher spread than the men, right? The men's is much tighter and there's not the gaps. So I would say that, and the women's, this data definitely has more spread, horizontal spread, which that's an indication that it has more variability, right? Okay, so these are the things we've kind of looked at. So let's maybe bring this back and see if we can put all this together as we answer these questions. So the BMI for women is blank and blank. The BMI for men is blank and blank. So let's come down here. What are my choices? Okay, so we're looking first at the skew. So this is a skew question, or if it's symmetric. And so is asking about the skewness or symmetry. The second thing is going to be modal. So these are the modalities of it, okay? Modality. So let's fill this in. So for women, we said that we said both of them, right? They're right skewed. And I didn't really write that down, but right skewed. And I had a really good question earlier. I kind of decided to redo some of these just to make it a little shorter. If I know where the center is, right here, right? Do you see how, half your data values are this way, but it's much larger on this side than it is on this side. So that's where we get this idea that it's right skewed. And the same thing here, we have a lot more data over to this right side than we do here. So like we have many more of the bends, compared to the number of data frequency tables that we have. So that's where we get this idea that they're both right skewed, is that more of the data is lying over to the right side, even though the humps tend to be over to the left, because that was a really good question And that's something, it's kind of the opposite of what you think, but it has to do with which way is the data skewing. It's skewing to the right, which is causing it to have the peak, or, to have most of it over to the left. But you have these outliers, if you will. You have more data laying out that way to the right. So BMI for women is right skew. And women, we said, is unimodal. It has one peak. So that's the unimodal. The BMI for men is also right skewed, and it has a bimodality to it. So there's two peaks that we identified. Now let's talk about comparing the centers. So I think that the typical value is pretty much similar, but let's see what else we have. So typical value, I think it appears similar for these two. I'm going to get rid of this. And now we're just looking at this, but the peak for which one occurs at a higher, but the peak for men, my peak moved, or I wrote that, what in the world? That's interesting. I'm not sure what happened there. I think I must have done something, y'all. Why did my peak move? It may have been something funny what happened. So that's a peak there. I mean, the peaks occur where my drawing is. I think that's what I matched with my drawing, but this was one of the peaks. So the peak for men, the largest peak of all, the one that's actually my peak value, but that's the second. So that would be the larger of the two. It happens at a higher BMI. The peak for men, it happens at a higher BMI. So that's the overall peak for the whole thing. But there are two of them on that one. Okay, I see there. Now, coming down, which value is more spread out? We said that women have more spread, right? I'm going to use the purple for that. So women values are more spread out. And so that means that they have more variation. So there's more variation in the body mass index of women. Okay, so that's number 13 from our practice test. And again, the problem number from the text would be 2.1-2.15.